On March 3, 1944, in East Anglia, England, Lieutenant William Overeat wrote to his sweetheart in Virginia, his hand trembling from exhaustion. "Tomorrow, we fly to Berlin and back in single-seat fighters, something everyone said was impossible. The brass insisted it couldn't be done." Through his window, he saw ground crews attaching cylindrical objects under his P-51 Mustang's wings. They looked like cardboard wrapped in brown paper. These new fuel tanks, dubbed paper bags by the pilots, were made of laminated paper and plastic resin. Crew chiefs assured Overeat they were reliable. "Same stuff the Brits use, they'll get you there and back." The mathematics of aerial warfare was about to change, not through firepower or metallurgy, but compressed paper soaked in resin made in a converted newspaper plant. The crisis peaked on October 14, 1943, Black Thursday. Colonel Hubert Zemke at Halesworth watched mission reports roll in like casualty lists of 291, B-17, flying fortresses sent to Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories. 60 were shot down and 17 scrapped, representing over 26% losses. Without fighter escort, the daylight bombing campaign was unsustainable. Technical Sergeant Robert Morgan Ball, turret gunner with the 100th Bomb Group, described the German tactics. "They waited until our P-47 escorts turned back at 375 miles, then attacked in waves with head-on assaults and rockets from twin-engine fighters. We were defenseless for 3 hours." At the 8th Air Force Technical Section in Bovington, Colonel Cass Howe examined a fuel tank made of laminated craft paper and plastic resin produced by Bowater Lloyd, a company known for newsprint. These paper tanks weighed 50 pounds empty compared to 150 for metal versions. This weight saving meant more fuel and greater range. The tanks used layers of craft paper bonded with resorcinol formaldehyde glue shaped over wooden forms with internal baffles coated with fire, resistant lacquer, and aluminum paint. British engineers, driven by metal shortages, had pioneered these tanks, but Howe saw their potential to extend fighter range. The first combat test in February 1944 saw P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group use 108-gallon paper tanks. Major James Goodson reported they performed flawlessly to Hanover and back, extending range by 125 miles. The P-51B Mustang arrived at Debden in late February 1944, and with two 108-gallon paper tanks, its combat radius reached 850 miles. Berlin, 580 miles from East Anglia, was now within reach. On March 4, 1944, the briefing at Debden was tense. Intelligence Officer Major John McCulpin revealed a mission map with a red ribbon to Berlin single-engine fighters. Would escort bombers to the Nazi capital, a 1,100-mile round trip. Captain William O'Brien of the 357th Fighter Group recalled the silence, followed by a whistle. Berlin, we were going all the way in fighters. The paper tanks were sophisticated, despite their simplicity, built in 3 parts: nose cone, tail, cone, and body. They used layered paper wrapped around cylinders with hand-laminated end caps. Each held 108 usable gallons of 100-octane fuel, measured 100 inches long, and passed 6 PSI pressure tests. They worked from sea level to 4,000 feet in temperatures from -60 to +120 degrees Fahrenheit Bowater. Lloyd's plants in Sittingbourne and Kemsley, staffed largely by women, produced thousands monthly using recycled paper and glue from Imperial Chemical Industries. Distributed manufacturing in British homes and workshops supplemented production. The tanks wrapped in brown paper for shipping were far more efficient to transport than metal tanks. Skepticism persisted among American experts. Wright Field declared paper tanks unfeasible. Yet by early 1944, the 8th Air Force had used over 15,000 without a failure. Colonel Howe ignored the critics as combat results proved the tank's effectiveness. On March 4th, P-51s and P-47s escorted 700 bombers to Berlin. Colonel Donald Blakesley led the Mustangs, telling pilots, "These tanks will get you there and back. Drop them at the initial point and engage." The mission saw losses, including Lieutenant Alan Bante shot down near Brandenburg, but the psychological impact was profound. Luftwaffe pilot Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke wrote of his shock at seeing American fighters over Berlin. Their intelligence had deemed it impossible. Bomber crews felt the difference. Sergeant Dale Rice of the 100th Bomb Group saw P-51s at 3,000 feet with contrails and drop tanks. On March 6th, with Mustang escorts, Luftwaffe interceptions dropped. Major Walter Nowotny, a top German ace, reported to Luftwaffe High Command that the Americans had solved the range problem. Production at Bowater Lloyd used recycled newspapers and packaging with resin that didn't compete with war priorities. A tank took 72 hours to produce from raw materials to completion. Logistics were simple. Master Sergeant Donald Manor at Leaston recorded ground crews unwrapping tanks, checking seals, and mounting them on bomb shackles in hours. A cockpit lever jettisoned both tanks simultaneously with check valves preventing fuel loss. The tank's single-use limitation came from resin dissolving in fuel after 5 hours, but 5 hours was enough. By May 1944, the impact was clear. Before long-range escorts, the 8th Air Force lost 7.6% of bombers monthly, with Black Thursday hitting 20.6%. With P-51s and paper tanks, losses fell to 1.5 to 2.2%, saving thousands of lives. Paper tanks were aerodynamic, creating less drag than metal versions and less likely to explode when hit. They biodegraded within months, unlike metal tanks that littered European fields. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, on the March 6th mission, noted perfect fuel transfer at 3,000 feet, dropped tanks near Wittenberg and shot down an FW-190. Without the tanks, he would have turned back at Brunswick. The extended range allowed fighter sweeps deep into Germany, attacking airfields and rail yards. Colonel Hub Zemke, in May 1944, concluded the tanks had shifted the air war as initiative to the Allies' German records from Messerschmitt AG in May 1944, acknowledged the Allies' revolutionary disposable tanks. They tried to replicate them, but lacked paper production and resin resources. Their centralized economy couldn't match the Allies' distributed manufacturing. Luftwaffe leaders like General Adolf Galland admitted in post-war interrogations that long-range fighters broke their defensive strategy. Logistics efficiency was striking. Sergeant James Patterson at Duxford noted paper tanks took 1/10 the shipping space of metal ones. A C-47 could carry hundreds of flattened paper tanks versus 40 metal ones. This allowed rapid resupply of forward airfields. Post-D-Day French farmers later reported paper tanks dissolved in rain, unlike metal tanks that damaged fields and livestock. Captain Donald Bryan of the 352nd Fighter Group experienced a rare tank leak on July 18, 1944. But still returned safely, showing the system's redundancy improvements. By late 1944, extended fuel storage to 12 hours and added cold weather treatments. The D-Day invasion showcased the tank's impact. Fighter bombers with paper tanks disrupted German reinforcements far inland. Captain Robert Johnson flew 3 missions on June 6, 1944, with extended loiter times over Normandy production, scaled to thousands monthly, with Bowater Lloyd leading, supplemented by other facilities. Metal tank production lagged due to aluminum shortages. Colonel Francis Gabreski, on July 5, 1944, used paper tanks to shoot down 3 Bf-109s near Brandenburg, noting their reliability at high altitude. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe was broken. German pilots had under 50 hours training compared to 400 for Americans. First Lieutenant Urban Drew, on October 7, 1944, flew 1,400 miles to Politz, dropping tanks to down 2 Meeting 262 jets. During the Battle of the Bulge, paper tanks were airdropped to forward bases, enabling rapid rearming. Captain Jack Ilfrey documented ground crews mounting new tanks in 20 minutes. German intelligence officer Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, in 1945, called paper tanks more significant than any new aircraft type, rendering their air defense obsolete. The Strategic Bombing Survey showed German fighter production dropped 40% and fuel production 90% by late 1944. Due to long-range escorts, Lieutenant Colonel John Landers called paper tanks the unsung hero of the air war. Without them, Berlin escorts would have been impossible. Production techniques influenced post-war manufacturing with lamination processes used in aerospace and electronics quality control. From Bowater Lloyd set industry standards, Soviet ace Colonel Ivan Kozhedub tested paper tanks in 1945, praising their simplicity. The last major use came on April 25, 1945, escorting reconnaissance to Berchtesgaden. Colonel Benjamin Davis, Jr. of the 332nd Fighter Group used paper tanks to Munich, proving their reliability at 3,000 feet. German civilians wrote of American fighters dropping paper tanks, showing wealth and industrial power. The Pentagon calculated paper tanks saved 8,000 bomber crew lives by reducing losses. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris credited the tanks with validating daylight bombing. General James Doolittle called them the most critical tactical development, turning the P-51 into a war-winning weapon. The human element was vital. Thousands of workers, mostly women at Sittingbourne, worked 3 shifts knowing each tank saved lives. The tanks withstood 3Gs full and 9Gs empty, functioning across extreme conditions from materials any nation could produce. German designer Willy Messerschmitt admitted they never imagined disposable tanks from non-strategic materials. The U.S. Air Force adopted long-range escort as doctrine influencing Cold War designs. The concept of disposable components shaped modern aviation. The environmental legacy was unintended but significant. The 15,000 paper tanks dropped in Europe biodegraded unlike metal tanks. French reports in 1946 showed no soil contamination from paper tanks. The Berlin Airlift and Korean War used evolved versions of the technology. At a 1995 Duxford reunion, Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland pointed to a paper tank as the turning point that brought the air war to Germany. AA's doorstep. The paper drop tank story shows victory often comes from simple solutions, scaled massively. British ingenuity and American production turned paper and resin into a war-winning tool. When Lieutenant William Overeat flew to Berlin on March 4, 1944, his paper tanks carried the work of thousands who never saw combat. Their innovation proved that practical solutions could outshine complex engineering, proving the best answer is often the most achievable when it matters most.